It is not clear what exactly philosophers or scientists mean when they claim the universe is mathematical. The obvious explanation would be that mathematics describe with precision what happens in the universe, but it seems they claim something more. Perhaps that the objects of the universe have a mathematical shape and move mathematically. But what does that mean? One way of expressing that idea is that the world is like a machine, a mechanical universe. And philosophers who were active in the 17th century, Galileo Galilei, René Descartes, Thomas Hobbes, and Isaac Newton, subscribed to this view. The quintessential machine of those days was the clock, with all its gears and parts. The movement of one gear affects the movement of another gear, and this one the movement of another gear, and so on and so forth. For some of these philosophers, the first movement, or the first gear, was moved by God. But since then, the universal clock has been working without intervention. Now, this idea of a mechanical universe that moves, the parts move because of the movement of previous parts, it's in contradiction with the purposeful universe of Aristotle. It's a mechanical universe. For Descartes, if the universe is a universal machine, the human body, including the brain or the nervous system, is not an exception. By the way, the idea that the mental processes, or at least basic mental processes, occur in the brain, it's another aspect of Descartes' anti-Aristotelianism. So, because for Aristotle, the mind was located in the heart. Galen, in the second century, a Roman physician and philosopher, surgeon, contradicted Aristotle and postulated that mind was located in the brain. But until the 17th century, the idea of Aristotle was still very strong. Okay, so René Descartes used a different metaphor to explain how the nervous system works, and he used the metaphor of some statues that were in the royal gardens of Saint-Germain, with parts that were moved by water that ran through pipes inside of them. And based on that analogy, he described what we today call a reflex. These are his words in his book On Man, published in 1662. For example, if the fire A is close to the foot B, the small particles of fire, which as you know move very swiftly, are able to move as well the part of the skin which they touch on the foot. In this way, by pulling at the little thread, C, which you see attached there, they at the same time open E, which is the entry for the pore D, which is where this small thread terminates, just as by pulling one end of a cord, you ring a bell which hangs at the other end. Now, when the entry of the pore or the little tube, DE, has thus been opened, the animal spirits flow into it from the cavity F, and through it they are carried partly into the muscles which serve to pull the foot back from the fire, partly into those which serve to turn the eyes and the head to look at it, and partly into those which serve to move the hands forward and to turn the whole body for its defense. Now, Thomas Hobbes went a bit further in two respects. One, Descartes is describing here a reflex. So the brain was responsible of low-level mental processes. But for high-level mental processes, the action of will, reasoning, and understanding, these happens in an immaterial mind. So for Thomas Hobbes, that's wrong. The mind is what happens in the brain. And he went a bit further. He says, if the universe is a machine, then societies are machines. And he expressed that view in his book, The Leviathan. Now, perhaps the most clear expression of this mechanical and deterministic universe was put by the French philosopher, physicist Pierre-Simon Laplace. In 1814, he wrote in a philosophical essay on probabilities the following words. We may regard the present state of the universe as the effect of its past and the cause of its future. An intellect which at a certain moment would know all forces that set nature in motion and all positions of all items of which nature is composed. If this intellect were also vast enough to submit these data to analysis, it would embrace in a single formula the movements of the greatest bodies of the universe and those of the tiniest atom. For such an intellect, nothing would be uncertain, and the future, just like the past, would be present before its eyes. So this intellect that can see everything was called later Laplace's demon. And so what he's expressing with this view is that even though our mind is not powerful enough to understand the world and to see how one thing causes another and so on and so forth, and potentially can be predicted with precision, but we humans can't do that. So we need to use sometimes probabilities in order to make predictions about the future. So we cannot establish that with certainty. But if there were an intellect, the Laplace demon, that could observe the whole universe, then there will be he or she would be able to observe all these causes and effects. So what he's saying is that even if we cannot, the humans cannot establish with precision causes and effects, in reality those things exist. More recently, there was a new development, a new philosophical movement that expressed the idea of the mechanism. And this was at the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century. And the idea was that in order to understand a phenomenon of an organism or a system, we need to understand as a system that is engaged in some behavior, which we call psi. But that behavior at the organism level is explained by the behavior or activities of component parts of that system. So in this case, the parts x1 to x5 are doing some activities called phi, and the activity of one part affects the activity of another part, and that part affects the activity of another part, and so on and so forth, like the gears of a clock. And that is what makes the organism produce some behavior. Finally, we've been talking about different metaphors to explain the universe, or to explain how the mind works. And those metaphors depend on the technology of the days that the metaphors are proposed. So if we had the clock as a metaphor for the universe, then when we talk about the mind, we had the metaphor of the telegraph, the metaphor of the telephone, and more recently the metaphor of the computer. So the mind is like a computer. Now, this idea of the mind of the computers and the computer as a machine, it takes us closer to the universe as mathematics. Because, in a sense, the computer physically is like a machine. It's no different than the clock, the gears of the clock. But what does that machine do? It does computations. So basically what the machine is doing is mathematics. And then we can say that the mind is mathematical in that respect.